The wind cut through my coat as I stood in the grocery store parking lot, purse clutched to my chest. I looked at them, my son, his wife, and their 2 teenagers, loading bags into the back of their SUV. They didn't look at me, not really. Eyes skimmed past, like I was an old lamppost or a cart someone else would return. I cleared my throat once, then again. "Would one of you mind giving me a ride home?" I asked, soft but clear. My son shifted his weight. His wife busied herself with the trunk latch. No one answered right away. The teenager, Jacob, looked up from his phone and said, "We're kind of full, Grandma." I looked at the back seat. 3 coats, a soccer ball, a few reusable bags. There was plenty of room. My son finally said, "It's just a short walk, isn't it, Mom? Not cruel, not unkind, just empty." I nodded slowly, like I agreed. Like it made perfect sense. My heart didn't pound. It just sank, quietly. "Sure," I said. "I could use the fresh air anyway." No one looked surprised. No one protested. And that told me everything. I smiled. That's the part that stings later, not what they did, but that I still smiled. "No worries," I said, backing away. "You all drive safe." He gave me a quick nod and closed the trunk. The kids were already back to their screens. I stood there just a second too long enough to feel foolish. They pulled away without another glance. I turned slowly, the weight of my purse suddenly heavier than it was when I left the house. The cold air hit my face, and I pulled my scarf tighter. Inside, something folded in on itself. Tight, small, sharp. I wasn't angry. I was diminished. Like a drawer quietly closing. As I stepped out onto the sidewalk, I let my breath fog the air. They didn't mean harm, I told myself. They were just busy. They didn't see me. Not really. But I saw myself. And I didn't like the shape I was starting to take. My boots made that soft crunching sound with each step. Frozen leaves, sidewalk grit. The wind wasn't cruel, just steady. It reminded me I was alone out there. Street lights flickered on slowly, one by one, and the houses glowed from inside like warm little secrets I didn't belong to. I didn't rush. I didn't dawdle either. I just walked. One foot in front of the other. Each step is quiet but heavy. I didn't cry. I didn't talk to myself. I just walked and listened. To the wind, to the sound of my own breath, to the silence pressing up against my ribs. It wasn't the cold that ached. It was the awareness, not to be forgotten, but of realizing I might have let it happen. That hurt, and still I walked. Each block smoothed over something jagged inside me. By the time I turned the corner toward Maple Street, my back was straighter. Not because I felt strong, because I needed to remember how to carry myself again. I passed the corner, where James used to wait after my shifts at the school. Same gas station, different name now. The sign buzzed like it always had. Back then, he'd honk twice, just for me. He'd lean over the passenger seat, grin through the window and say, "There she is, my sunshine in a sweater." I paused, just for a second. No one was waiting now, but I still looked. And in that stillness, I felt something tear a little. Not the kind of tear that breaks. It was the kind that softens. I used to be someone who was picked up, expected, welcome. Now, I felt like a check mark on someone else's list. The cold air smelled like gasoline and damp sidewalk. It carried a truth I didn't want but couldn't ignore. Somewhere along the way, care turned into convenience, and I had let them trade the two like they were equal. When I reached my front steps, I stopped and rested my hand on the rail. I didn't cry. I didn't sign. I just stood there. The porch light flickered above me, always a little stubborn in the cold. I opened the door slowly, walked in, and shut it with care. The silence inside didn't feel empty. It felt earned. I took off my coat, hung it by the door, and ran my fingers along the fabric, still warm from my walk. Then I went into the kitchen and filled the kettle. The whistle was gentle when it came, like it knew not to be loud tonight. I poured the water, dropped it in a chamomile bag, and sat at the table alone. No music, no phone, just steam rising in quiet spirals. I didn't feel strong, but I didn't feel broken either. I just felt like myself. A woman who'd been walking past, but who still knew how to walk home. I can still hear it if I close my eyes. That soft, uneven thudding of little feet barreling down the hallway. Bare toes slapping against the wood, arms flailing, hair a mess of bedhead and pillow creases. One would be holding a stuffed animal by the leg, the other dragging a blanket. Like a cape! "Mama!" they'd yell. Like my name was the answer to everything. Sometimes they needed a bandage, sometimes just a hug. And sometimes they didn't need anything at all. They just wanted to be close. Back then, love showed up in sticky morning kisses, crumpled drawings on fridge paper, and dandelions shoved into a chipped mug like they were fresh-cut roses. I never asked for more. I didn't need to. I'd sit at the edge of the bed while they told me their dreams, half-understood nonsense about flying or talking cats. Their fingers would tug at my sleeve like making sure I wouldn't drift away. Didn't know I'd miss that sound, the sound of being needed, more than any silence. Now the hallway is quiet. The wood creaks when I walk, not when they run. And when I wake up, it's not to the sound of my name shouted joyfully. It's to the stillness that only older mothers understand. My hands used to move from sunup to well past dark, and not a moment of it felt wasted. I packed their lunches with the apple slices fanned just right, the crusts cut off their sandwiches, and a little note with a heart at the bottom. I folded laundry while humming to the radio, matching socks into careful little balls. I ironed their shirts for school picture day like they were about to meet royalty. There were field trip forms, lost permission slips, last-minute bake sale requests. I signed them all, smiled through them all. "Thanks, Mom," they'd mutter on their way out the door, barely looking up. I didn't mind. My hands were always full. And my heart? It never once complained. Back then, giving wasn't something I measured. I just did it, because love, to me, meant motion, meant showing up, and staying soft. But now, looking back, I see how many pieces I handed out without keeping any for myself. I wasn't tired then. But now I wonder why I never stopped to refill. There came a time, quiet and unannounced, when no one called me by my first name anymore. Not Lena, just Mom, just can you, or did you? And somewhere in between the carpool lines and late-night science projects, I became just that. The woman behind the pancakes. The woman behind the steering wheel. The one who made things happen quietly, but was never really in the picture. I had this apron, blue and soft from years of wear. It used to have little strawberries printed on it, though most had faded away. I wore it like it was part of me. I tied it on every morning without a thought. And somewhere along the way, it became the only thing people saw when they looked at me. "Mom, where's my uniform? Honey, what's for dinner?" Even James. He used to ask me what I thought about things, politics, books, the big stuff. But eventually, I was just the keeper of the grocery list. Sometimes I'd pass the mirror and catch a glimpse and think, I used to want more. I used to have dreams. I painted once. I wanted to visit the Grand Canyon. I wonder when I folded those dreams away, like holiday linens, saved for a someday that never came. And I wonder if I even remember how to untie the apron. I sat in the folding chair outside the multi-purpose room, my tray of cupcakes balanced on my lap, and listened as the PTA president thanked everyone except me again. It was always like that. I baked, I budgeted, I organized sign-up sheets like a general preparing for battle, but no one ever said, "Tell us about yourself." They just asked if I brought napkins. The moms in the front row wore matching t-shirts. I wore the same jeans. I always did, the ones with the little flower smudge near the knee. I smiled through it. Passed out cupcakes with my famous frosting. People nodded their thanks as they licked their fingers, but no one looked me in the eye. I drove home in my minivan with the last 2 cupcakes riding shotgun and the windows down just enough to cool the air. The smell of sugar and vanilla lingered in the front seat, and for the first time I whispered out loud, "When do I get to be seen?" The wind didn't answer, but the ache in my chest did. There was a time I painted, real paintings. Not finger paints or school projects, but quiet hours of brushes and color, just for me. I used to sit by the window with a mug of tea and a sketchbook, letting the morning light hit the page just right. Now, I'm not even sure where the brushes are. Maybe in the attic, packed away with the baby blankets and boxes labeled Misk. I reached for a book the other night, one of the old ones with dog-eared pages and a pressed leaf tucked between chapter 14 and 15. I used to underline lines that moved me. Now the words felt blurry. Not because of my eyes, but because I'd forgotten how to settle long enough to be moved. It made my chest ache, like I'd stumbled upon a version of myself I hadn't seen in years. I set the book back down and looked around the room. The TV was still on, murmuring nothing important. The walls held pictures of everyone else, and I sat there, quiet, feeling like a friend I'd drifted away from. It didn't happen in one loud moment. It was quiet, one skipped, thank you, one forgotten. Birthday, one plate set aside without acknowledgement. The candle didn't burn out. It just got smaller each night. Still lighting the room, but unnoticed. I made dinners that disappeared without a word. I folded clothes that were grabbed mid-sentence, and still, I gave. Not because I didn't notice, because I didn't know how to stop. But something shifted. One night, I stood at the stove stirring casserole, and my daughter walked in. She looked at the table and asked, "Is this the same thing we had last week?" I nodded. She shrugged and left, and I stood there with the spoon in my hand and felt the weight of it, not in my arm, but in my chest. They saw the meal, but not the hands that made it. That night, after the dishes were washed, I didn't turn on the TV. I sat at the table and just breathed, not angry, not bitter, just aware. And in that small awareness was a flicker, a beginning. The idea had been sitting in the back of my mind for months, growing like one of those little seeds you forget you planted. I'd been jotting things down in my notebook, stories from neighbors, bits of history from the town archive, little recipes I thought might bring someone joy. I wanted to make something for folks like me. Something you could hold in your hands, read slowly over morning coffee. So, that night, over meatloaf and sweet corn, I finally said it. I was thinking. I began, fingers tapping lightly on the edge of my plate. What if I started a newsletter for our community? Just stories, interviews, old recipes maybe. Printed, not online. My hands trembled, but just a little. Enough to make me notice. I looked around the table, hoping they'd smile, maybe even say something kind. I know it sounds small, I added quickly, but it could mean something to people who still like the feel of paper between their fingers. No one said much at first. My voice felt too big and too small in that silence, hopeful, but bracing. I just wanted to be heard, not celebrated. Just heard, and even that, it turns out, took more courage than I thought. It started with my son, just one small, careless laugh. "Mom," he said, chuckling under his breath, "you don't even use Google." His wife snorted. My granddaughter looked confused. The air shifted. It wasn't cruel, not exactly, but it wasn't kind either. It was dismissive, the kind of laugh that makes you feel like a child showing off a crayon drawing to someone who's already moved on. I laughed too, or something like it. a short, hollow sound that didn't feel like me. "Fair point," I said. Fair enough. But inside, my heart curled inward like parchment in a fire. They didn't mean harm, I know that. But they also didn't mean to listen, and that stayed with me. I picked at my peas, nodded at the usual dinner talk, but I wasn't really there anymore. That laugh had already done its work. It had told me what they thought of my dream, small, silly, outdated, and it told me who I was to them, someone who had already done all she was ever going to do. The plates were cleared. Dessert was eaten. Coffee poured, but their words, soft, sharp, half-laughed, still hung in the air like steam that clung to the kitchen tiles. I folded the napkins slowly, the good ones I only brought out for family dinners. The room felt smaller, somehow, quieter, but not in a peaceful way. I could still hear it in my head. You don't even use Google. That sentence echoed more than it should have. Not because it was clever, but because it landed so carelessly. I stacked the dessert forks beside the sink. No one noticed. No one said thank you. They moved on to weekend plans, soccer practice, and the weather. And I stood there, napkin in hand, wondering how I became someone so easily laughed off. It wasn't bitterness I felt, it was something slower, like shrinking, like sitting in your own kitchen and feeling like an outsider in your own story, and realizing that somewhere along the way, the table turned, and I wasn't at the center of it anymore. I nodded. That's what I remember most. Not the hurt, not the sting, but how easily I nodded. "Maybe you're right," I said with a smile so smooth it startled me. It didn't even crack. No one questioned it. No one pushed back. They just kept talking, moving on like my moment had been a commercial break. But inside, something shifted, not snapped. No, it was quieter than that. It was the kind of shift you feel behind your ribs, like a door you didn't know was open, slowly closing itself, not in anger, just in knowing. Like something had reached its edge. I rinsed a dish and stared at the way the soap slid down the porcelain. "Maybe you're right," I said again, this time just to myself, and I understood I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for permission, not for validation. Something inside me had clicked, not loud, not dramatic, just final. They left their plates behind, like they always did, forks scattered, napkins rumpled, crumbs of cornbread still on the edge of the table. Stood at the sink, water running warm over my hands, washing each dish one by one. The room was quiet, except for the clink of silverware and the gentle swoosh of lemon soap bubbles. My mind wandered, not to them, but to me, to a version of myself, from long ago, the girl who wrote poems in the margins of church bulletins, the woman who once clipped out newspaper columns and dreamed of writing her own. Where had she gone? I rinsed a plate, then another, and instead of letting the memory float away like usual, I held on to it this time. I remembered her clearly. I even smiled, because maybe she wasn't gone. Maybe she'd just been waiting for the quiet, and now that it had come, maybe I was finally ready to hear her again. The garage door creaked like it hadn't been opened in years, probably because it hadn't. I pulled it up slowly, and dust greeted me like an old friend, honest, undisturbed. I coughed, waved my hand through the air. The bulb overhead blinked to life after a few flickers, casting everything in a soft amber that made the boxes look like relics from another life. There were Christmas bins with cracked lids, a chair missing a leg, stacks of old puzzles and decorations wrapped in brittle newspaper. I stood in the doorway for a while, just breathing it in. The scent of old cardboard, dried pine needles, and that faint musty trace of motor oil. This was the space that used to hold bikes, then storage, then nothing in particular. But now, it was mine, and I wasn't cleaning it to make room for anyone else. Not for spring guests, not for the kids coming home. This was for me. I tied back my sleeves and picked up a broom. Every push sent another cloud floating into the air. But I didn't stop. The grit didn't scare me, because underneath it all, I knew something was waiting, something I had long buried but never forgotten, and I was finally ready to dig it up. In one of the bottom drawers of the old tool cabinet, underneath a stack of mismatched batteries and rusted screwdrivers, I found it, my old tape recorder. The silver was faded, corners chipped, and the buttons were stiff, but it was there. Held it in my palm like I was holding a piece of myself I hadn't touched in decades. I pressed the power switch. The little red light blinked. Still alive. I smiled, tight at first, then wide. I set it gently on the card table I'd dragged to the middle of the garage and pressed record. The click echoed a little, small but definite. I cleared my throat. My name is Lena Carter, I said softly. The sound of my own voice startled me. Fragile, slightly unsure, but undeniably present. It didn't sound like the mother or the grandmother they all knew. It sounded like someone stepping out of the shadows, and in that moment, I felt it, like a heartbeat, like the quiet proof that I hadn't disappeared. I'd just been on pause, waiting for someone, anyone, to press play. It was still dark outside when I poured my coffee and made my way out to the garage. The floor was clean now, the clutter cleared, into a corner. My little table sat in the center, a notebook to one side, the recorder waiting in the middle. I sat down slowly, warmed my hands on the mug, and stared at the red button. Then I pushed it. My name is Lena Carter, I began. I'm 72 years old. I was born in Brooksville, Kentucky. I've lived here, in Willow Ridge, for almost 40 years. My voice trembled just a bit, not from fear, but from something deeper, something like returning. I used to paint, I whispered. I used to write poems I never showed anyone. I've been a mother, a wife, a lunch lady, a church volunteer. I've baked over 2,000 birthday cakes. I laughed softly. Then I cried. I didn't even realize the tears had come until one landed on the edge of the table. I kept speaking. I spoke about who I'd been before I became everyone else's everything. It didn't need to be perfect. It just needed to be true. And when I finally stopped, I let the silence hold me, like the recorder had carved something into the air that couldn't be taken back. I was here. I mattered. Still, I began knocking on doors. Just the quiet ones. People who wouldn't mind a visit from a woman with a notebook and a curious heart. Mr. Halverson down the block. He'd served in Korea, lost 2 toes to frostbite, but still polished his shoes every morning. Miss June, 2 doors down. Her house was filled with doilies and silence. She hadn't spoken about her late husband in 15 years, but she told me he once wrote her a love letter every Tuesday for a decade. I sat across from them, the recorder placed gently between us, and I listened, really listened. Sometimes they cried. Sometimes they laughed. Sometimes they paused and said, "I've never told anyone that before." And in those moments, the room felt lit from the inside, like their words reached into the corners that hadn't seen light in years. It wasn't just stories. It was life, poured out in soft sentences, folded like letters, stored like heirlooms. Every voice reminded me that we are never just our age, never just our labels. We are stories walking around in bodies. And now, those stories had a place to land. I kept a little spiral notebook beside the recorder. Nothing fancy, just blue lines and a soft cover that bent at the corners. Every time someone spoke, I wrote their name at the top of a fresh page. In careful script, slow, as if I was stitching it in fabric instead of ink. June Thorne, Harold Halverson, Marcy and Donnie Rhodes. Each name carried weight, not heaviness, significance. I wrote down their stories in longhand, never typing. I wanted to feel the words forming under my fingers. It reminded me of writing thank you notes when I was a girl. Intentional, thoughtful, never rushed. For the first time in years, my hands worked not out of duty, but devotion. The kind that feels more like prayer than labor. I'd pause between interviews and read over the pages again, smiling at a phrase, underlining a memory. It wasn't just a project, it was a purpose. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was chasing the days. I felt like I was finally holding them. I spread the pages out on the kitchen table like they were something holy. Not many, just 6 double-sided sheets, printed neatly, carefully. The ink was still a little smudged in places where I'd rested my hand without realizing. I tapped their edges into alignment, twice, then once more, just to be sure. The sunlight, coming through the window, lit the surface of the table like a spotlight. It made the coffee in my mug look golden. I reread the opening line for the 3rd time, then skipped to the end. There it was. My name. Lena Carter. It sat there at the bottom of the last page, small, nervous, like it wasn't sure it belonged, but showed up anyway. I smoothed the wrinkle near the margin and let my palm rest on the paper a second longer. It had been so long since I'd made something that had me in it. Not as a mother or a helper or a note writer for someone else's accomplishments, just me. This wasn't for a grade. It wasn't for the church bulletin. It was a story, a memory, a slice of a neighbor's life, a recipe from my aunt. A few thoughts that had been waiting their turn. I stacked the pages into a folder and held it close to my chest. And in that moment, I let myself hope. The bell above the library door gave that same soft jingle it always had. The smell hit me first. Paper. Dust. Something floral from a nearby shelf display. It was all so familiar, and yet I felt like I was walking in for the first time. I clutched the folder tighter, suddenly self-conscious about the slight bend at the edge. There weren't many people inside. A teenager hunched over a laptop, an older man asleep in a reading chair. The floorboards creaked beneath me like they were whispering, "Is it really you?" I used to come here once a week, story time with the kids, book club every other month. But life got busy. Or I did. Now, every step toward the main desk made my heart thud louder. It wasn't fear exactly, just the kind of nervous you feel when you're offering something tender, something you don't want laughed off. I took a deep breath. Then I walked up, set my folder down gently and said, "Hi, Susan. I was wondering if you might take a look at this." She adjusted her glasses, gave me that warm librarian smile, and pulled the first page from the folder. The room faded around me as I watched her read. Her eyes moved slowly, thoughtfully. No skimming. Her lips pressed together like she was holding in something, emotion, maybe surprise. She turned to page 2, then 3, and I stood there, stiff, hands clasped. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. When she reached the end, she didn't speak right away. Then she looked up, glasses sliding down the bridge of her nose, and said in a hush, "This is beautiful." I swallowed hard. My throat tightened, like I'd held my breath without knowing. She placed her hand over the pages and added, "You have a voice, Mrs. Carter. Not a compliment out of politeness. Not the kind you give someone for effort. Real. Earned." At that moment, I wasn't someone's mother or neighbor or errand runner. I was someone with something to say. And for the first time in years, someone had truly listened. She took the top sheet and placed it carefully on the checkout counter, right next to the town bulletin board. No ceremony. No announcement. Just a gentle gesture that held more meaning than she knew. "We'll see what your neighbors think," she said with a soft smile. And with that, it was out in the world. My little newsletter, stories and snippets that had lived. In my heart and on my notepads was finally among people. She even angled it just so the title faced outward. "Would you mind printing more next week?" she asked. I nodded, unable to speak for a second. The scanner beeped in the background. A little girl skipped past with a stack of picture books, And there I stood, in the middle of all of it, not invisible, not extra, just part of something. Again. My words had found a place, and quietly, without anyone really noticing, so had I. The air felt sweeter than usual as I walked home, not because anything grand had happened, just because something small finally had. I passed the church fence and saw the tulips peeking up, bright red and yellow, defiant against the soil. I paused for a moment and smiled at them. Then I saw Marcy from 3 doors down and gave her a wave. She smiled back. Funny, I used to think she didn't remember my name, but today she called out, "Hi, Lena!" I kept walking, the folder still under my arm, even though it was empty now. The sun warmed my back, and the sidewalk didn't feel as hard beneath my feet. I didn't need applause, just that one quiet yes from someone who meant it. And that was more than enough to carry me home. The first week, I printed 10. It felt like enough, optimistic even. I laid them out on the counter by the library checkout desk, tucked just beneath the bulletin board between lost pet flyers and church potluck announcements. The next week, I printed 20. By the third, I walked in and paused mid-step. The stack was nearly gone. 2 copies left. That was it. I blinked, almost unsure I was seeing it right. Susan, the librarian, looked up from the front desk and smiled that knowing sort of smile. "They're asking when the next one's coming," she said. "Some even took extras for friends." I laughed, just once, soft and short, not from humor, but from disbelief. Then I reached up and pressed my hand to my chest, like I was trying to hold the moment still. "They really read it?" She nodded, cover to cover. "One man said your story about the barbershop made him cry." I looked down at my shoes, too bashful to hold her eyes. I hadn't expected anything. Maybe a nod, a smile, but not this. I left the library that day walking a little slower, not because I was tired, but because I wanted to feel every step of that joy. The phone rang just as I was pulling the cornbread out of the oven. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and reached for the receiver, the old kind still mounted on the wall. I didn't recognize the number, but I picked it up anyway. "This is Lena." There was a pause, then a cheerful voice. "Mrs. Carter, this is Mayor Whitaker." I nearly dropped the phone. She went on. "I just wanted to say thank you for your newsletter. It reminded folks what the community feels like. Real stories, real people. It's beautiful." I mumbled something polite. I can't even remember exactly what. When we hung up, I stood there staring at the wall. Then I played the voicemail again, just to be sure I'd heard it right the first time. Same words, same warmth. My knees felt unsteady, but my spirit straightened like a flag catching wind. Me, Lena Carter. Thanks to the mayor, and not for what I used to be, but for what I still was becoming. I was folding one of the newer drafts when I got the call from Judy. "You'll never believe this," she said. "My granddaughter heard your name on a podcast." "Ace." "Podcast?" I laughed, unsure I'd heard her right. "Yup. Some girl in her class quoted your article, the one about the old bakery closing. Said it gave her goosebumps. When my granddaughter told her you were her grandma, the girl said, 'That's your grandma?'" I covered my mouth and chuckled, stunned. I hadn't gone anywhere, not in a long time. I still folded laundry the same way, brewed coffee in the same old pot. But somehow, my words had traveled. They had legs, wings, whatever stories grow when someone's finally listening. I walked outside with a draft in my hand, the porch light glowing behind me, the scent of honeysuckle thick in the evening air. I looked up at the stars and whispered, "Would you look at that?" It didn't feel like pride exactly. It felt like belonging, like finally finding a seat in a room you never knew you were allowed to enter. I just poured a mug of chamomile tea when the segment came on. "Meet the voice of Willow Ridge," the anchor said, smiling. I froze, mid-step, tea towel still in my hand. My face flashed on the screen, well, part of it. A photo Susan must have submitted, the one from the library bulletin board. The news anchor went on about the newsletter, the community stories, the local impact. Then, she said my name, Lena Carter. Simple, clear, like it belonged. I didn't cry. I just closed my eyes and let it land, soft and full, like a warm quilt pulled over the chest. It didn't feel like fame. It felt like being seen, finally, through my own voice. I sat on the couch, tea cooling in my lap, the TV casting that familiar flicker across the room. And I thought, this isn't surreal. It's real. And earned, and mine. The same old kitchen table, the one that had once held peanut butter sandwiches, Elmer's glue, and science fair disasters. Now it held stories. Stacks of printed newsletters, drafts clipped with binder clips, a new notepad, with ideas scribbled down in the corners. I still folded towels on one end of it, still made pot roast while reading over edits with gravy on my sleeve. But the table had changed. Or maybe I had, because now I wasn't just making meals. I was making meaning. I'd look over at the pages and smile, thinking, someone's going to read that tomorrow. Someone I might never meet. Someone I might have passed in the grocery aisle years ago without knowing we shared the same ache, the same laugh, the same roots. And now, through these stories, we were finding each other. The fan whirred overhead, and the house smelled like paper, lemon cleaner, and something just starting to bloom. I didn't need to leave the table to feel like I was moving forward. Right there, in the heart of the house, my life had grown again. The phone buzzed against the windowsill, right between the vase of wildflowers and my half-full cup of tea. I wasn't expecting anyone. Most of the time these days, calls were spam or reminders about dental checkups, but it was my son. "Hey, Mom," he said, his voice light, easier than I remembered. "Quick question. What mic are you using? For your interviews, I mean." Blinked, caught off guard. "Oh, it's just a handheld Sony. From years ago. Still works. Cool. I'm thinking of starting a little thing. Podcast or something. Figured I'd ask the expert." He laughed lightly. I did too, though mine caught in my throat just a bit. We chatted for a few more minutes. Small talk, nothing too deep. When he hung up, he said, "Thanks, Mom. Really." I set the phone down gently, like it might break if I let it go too fast. The curtain beside me swayed with the breeze, brushing my arm like it was checking in. I stared at the wall for a while. Not sad, just full. Surprised by the softness of it all, he had asked me something, not out of obligation, not to correct me, but because this time he saw I had something worth knowing. It was just after dinner when my daughter called. I almost didn't answer. I figured it was another work update or a question about Nana's cobbler recipe. But instead I heard, "So, I was thinking, can I feature you on my Instagram?" I smiled into the receiver. "You want to feature me?" She laughed. "Yeah, Mom. You're kind of a big deal now, local celeb status and all." I agreed, said yes, even offered a photo she might use. And she meant well, I know she did. There was lightness in her voice, pride even. It warmed me. But still, somewhere inside, I remembered the eye rolls, the polite nods when I'd once mentioned writing, the way she'd say, "Mom, come on," whenever I brought up an idea. I wasn't bitter, just aware. It's strange, isn't it? How attention can dress itself up like affection when you've finally done something that fits their idea of worth. She called me a big deal. I smiled, said thank you, and tucked the moment gently in my pocket, beside the others I carry carefully. I answered their questions. Of course I did. Where do you find your stories? What editing app do you use? How do you get people to open up? Each time I answered with calm, steady kindness, but only what they asked. Nothing more. I didn't gush, didn't fill the silences with over-explaining, didn't rush to prove I still mattered. I let the pauses breathe, let the space be quiet. It wasn't far. It was peaceful. A few years ago, I might have tried to earn their attention with one more detail, one more offering. Now I just listened, responded, stayed still. I watched the garden sway outside the porch. The light was soft and low. The air smelled of warm dirt and late roses. There's strength in restraint, knowing your voice carries more weight when you're not trying to carry the whole conversation. I loved them no less. I simply didn't chase anymore. And in that stillness, I felt more connected to myself than I ever had. They don't bring it up. That day in the parking lot, the wind, the excuses, the way I'd smiled and waved them off. Maybe they forgot. Or maybe they remember and just hope I don't. But I do. I can still feel the cold pressing through my coat, the ache in my legs, the way my purse strap dug into my shoulder with every step home. I remember pretending I didn't mind, that I'd enjoy the walk, that the air would do me good. But I also remember how small I felt. Success didn't erase that day. It just made me more certain of who I'll never be again, the woman too afraid to say, "That hurt me." Now, when I look at them, I still love them, but I love myself too, and I know better than to wait by doors that don't open. That parking lot taught me something no headline ever could. Sometimes the place where you're overlooked is the exact place you begin to look inward and see yourself clearly. After the segment ended, the room stayed quiet a beat longer than usual. Then forks clinked. Someone asked for seconds. The world began again. I sat down beside my youngest grandson, who scooted just a little closer. He leaned in with his syrup-sticky fingers and whispered, "Grandma's famous." I chuckled and ruffled his hair. "Shh, don't let it go to my head." But inside, something warm flickered awake, small but steady. Not because I'd been on TV, not because the anchor had said my name right, because the child I used to chase with snacks and bedtime songs saw me, not as a background, not as the one who cooked, as someone to be proud of. It wasn't a headline that made me feel known. It was that whisper, passed like a secret between hearts. Just 3 words, but I carried them like a ribbon in my pocket for the rest of the night. He didn't say, "I'm sorry. He didn't bring up the parking lot, the ride I asked for and didn't get. The way I'd once been, laughed off like a punchline with an apron. But he looked at me, not over my shoulder, not with distracted kindness, with real, direct, thoughtful eyes. He asked if I wanted more wine, and when I nodded, he poured it carefully, steady hand, soft smile. And in that silence, I felt the apology. Not spoken, but felt. And somehow that mattered more. I didn't need him to list his regrets. I didn't need confessions. I just needed that one look, the kind that says, "I see you now. I didn't before, but I do now." It was the first time in years I didn't feel like an empty chair at my own table. He saw the woman, not just the meal she made. I cut the pie with a slow, practiced rhythm. Pumpkin first, then apple. No fanfare, no speech. "Who wants a slice?" I asked, the same way I always had. Plates were passed. Whipped cream added. The smallest one licked her spoon before even touching the crust, and I didn't wait for compliments. Didn't check their faces for approval. I just served. Sat, picked up my own fork, and laughed when someone made a joke about Uncle Ray snoring through football again. The room buzzed around me, soft and full. No one toasted me. No one said, "You did it." And that was perfect, because I didn't need to be celebrated. I just needed to belong. And tonight, I did. Not because of what I'd done, but because of who I'd quietly always been. The kettle hummed in the background, its steam swirling in ribbons above the stove. I stood barefoot on the warm patch of linoleum where the morning sun always landed, same spot it had for years. I could have listed every time they'd let me down. Each moment lived in me like pressed flowers, flattened, faded, but still detailed. The day they left me waiting, the way they used to laugh at my ideas, how they forgot my birthday that one year and called it just a mix-up. I knew the list, sharp, easy to name, but I never said it out loud, not once. Those memories stayed folded up in the back drawer with old greeting cards and family recipes stained with batter. I didn't throw them out. I just didn't take them out anymore. I stirred my tea, let the spoon tap gently against the mug. No bitterness in the sound, just metal against ceramic. Light and clear. There's power in silence, not the angry kind, but the kind that chooses peace over performance. I didn't need to be right. I didn't need them to sit me down and beg for forgiveness. I just needed to keep living. And so I did. Lately, after breakfast, they stayed. No one jumped up to check their phones. No rush to head out, just quiet lingering. My son refilled his coffee without saying much. My daughter wiped crumbs into a napkin slower than usual. They asked small things. "Where did you get this jam? Do you still use that old mixer?" The kind of questions that fill the space between people gently. They didn't say sorry. Not once. But I didn't expect them to. Their presence softened in a way words couldn't. We sat longer than we used to. No one looked at the clock. Even the silence between us felt different. No longer strained, just open. The toaster popped. Someone chuckled at an old story. I smiled and poured more coffee. I didn't need anything more than that. It wasn't about an apology. It was about the atmosphere. And something in the air told me we were healing. Quietly, steadily, without needing to say we were. These days, I wake up lighter. No big shift. No dramatic change in circumstance. Just a quiet softening. I didn't know I needed. I stopped waiting for the apology. Stopped hoping for the moment they'd suddenly understand every corner of my hurt. I don't need that anymore. Forgiveness wasn't something I wrapped up in a bow and handed over. It wasn't theirs to receive. It was mine to carry. Mine to let. Bloom in the space where resentment used to sit. I fluff the pillows, fold the quilt at the end of the bed. The sunlight comes in through the lace curtains and lands on the rug like gold. I breathe it in. Lavender from the drawer sachets. Linen washed just yesterday. I move slower now, not from age, but from intention. This peace I've found. I don't explain it to anyone. I won't post about it. I don't even mention it on the phone, because it's not for them to confirm. It's for me to live. It was early when she called. "Mom," she said, half sheepish, "I need your blueberry muffin recipe." I smiled. "The one from the newsletter?" "Yeah. But yours still tastes better. Mine don't come out the same." I leaned on the kitchen counter, mixing the bowl still out from the morning batch. "Use buttermilk, not milk," I said. "And fold, don't stir." She jotted notes. I could hear the pen scratching on her end. "Oh, and hum while they bake." "What?" "Just a little tune. I always did." She laughed, soft and surprised. "That's it then. I wasn't humming. We..." Both laughed. She didn't ask for forgiveness, but she asked for my recipe. That mattered more. Maybe love doesn't always come in the form of a confession or a grand gesture. Maybe it shows up in the details we still reach for, the flavors we want to pass down. Maybe healing looks like a daughter wanting to get the muffins just right. I passed the basket around the table. Warm muffins, folded napkins, jam in a little glass dish with a spoon that had lost its shine. "Here you go, sweetheart," I said, setting a plate down in front of my grandson. He smiled up at me like I was magic. I looked around. My son buttered his muffin carefully. My daughter complimented the crisp edges. No one rushed. No one hovered on their phones. They didn't look at me like I owed them anything. They looked at me with care. And I didn't need to say a single profound word, no speech. No "I forgive you" ceremony. Just baked sweetness and quiet moments passed from hand to hand. That was enough. That was everything. Because sometimes forgiveness doesn't sound like anything at all. It just tastes warm, familiar, and soft on the tongue. The screen flickers across the far wall, painting soft patterns of light against the old wallpaper. I don't sit too close. I never have. There's comfort in the space between me and the spotlight. The couch sags just right where I always sit, the cushion molded to my shape like an old friend who never complains. I sip my tea, still warm, the scent of honey and chamomile floating in the air. The anchor's voice rises and falls with practiced ease. Names, headlines, weather updates. I sit in the shadows, on purpose. I don't need to be front and center. I don't need the brightness. It's enough just to know the stories are landing somewhere, softly, honestly. Stories that started at my kitchen table now ripple out like stones dropped in water. That glow across the room doesn't define me, but it reminds me I'm no longer invisible, and that's enough. Because even in the quiet, even in the dark, I know I'm seen. The quilt across my lap has been with me longer than some memories. I stitched it when the kids were small, naps and cartoons and chicken noodle sick days. It's threadbare now, but still warm. Still mine. I fold it carefully across my knees as the news rolls on. It's a habit. Something to do with my hands. Even after all these years, my fingers still move with care, slow and certain. Kind of like how I live now. There's pride here, but not the kind that shouts. The kind that settles into your bones like the weight of the quilt. Familiar, earned, outside. The breeze tugs gently at the curtain. It smells like rain might be coming. The world moves faster these days, but I don't rush to keep up. Because some things, like this quilt, like this chair, like the stories I tell, don't age out of meaning. They just soften, and soften is strong. 2, the volume is low, just enough for the words to reach me. Mrs. Lena Carter, local writer and storyteller. I smile. Not wide, but true. Not because I crave the recognition, but because there's something beautiful about being named, about someone, somewhere, saying your name with care. Not as an afterthought, not as a joke, but as someone whose words mattered. Outside, the crickets hum their evening chorus. I sip the last of my tea, let the warmth linger in my chest. I never needed to be famous. I just wanted to matter. To someone. And now, when they say my name, maybe someone feels a little less alone, and that is everything. Sometimes I think about the people I wrote about, the man who carried his late wife's scarf in his jacket pocket, the veteran who whispered secrets to me that no one else ever heard, the women who cried when they finally saw their truth printed on paper, like seeing themselves in a mirror for the first time. Their stories live in mine. They always will. Every paragraph I printed, every word I edited, wasn't just about me. It was about us, the quiet ones, the overlooked, the ones whose lives didn't make headlines but shaped the world anyway. When the news anchor says Lena Carter, I don't just hear myself. I hear all of them, tucked, gently in the folds of that name, and I carry them still, with reverence, because the greatest gift I ever gave was letting someone else feel seen. It always scrolls across the screen, last, small white letters, story by Lena Carter. And every time I lean in just a little, not to read it, to whisper back, I'm still here, not loud, not bitter, just steady. It's not defiance, it's a declaration, a reminder to the girl I used to be, the one folding laundry while her dreams collected dust, to the woman watching with a paper plate in her lap, thinking she's too late, to every person who thinks their story has passed its prime. You're not done, you're not gone, you're just waiting to be seen again. I sit back, the glow fades, the rocking chair slows to stillness, and outside, the stars blink softly, like they heard me. If my story found its way to your heart tonight, I'd be grateful to have you stay a while and subscribe. And if you've ever felt unseen until one quiet moment proved otherwise, tell me about it if you'd like. I'll be here listening.